Hello, folks, and welcome to another video of Worldview or Cosmovision. And today I'm very excited because I have a very dear friend of mine, and probably some of you know him. He's been teaching South America and Siberia, which we're going to talk about that later. And he's in town today, this week actually, and we're here in my home, Studios of Field. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about his experience, his background, and he's going to give us some advice to theology students, pastors, wives, and men in general. So be welcome to Pastor and Dr. Don E. Galardi, directly from Michigan, right now in Colombia. Pastor Don, thank you so much for joining me.
It's good to be with you.
We've been friends for quite a few years, and you've been, many people know you're a great influence in my life through your teachings, your sermons, and your life. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about that.
Okay.
And the goal is to inspire some students here in our country, in South America, and probably others, maybe in the US too. And because as you know, the Reformation is growing. Mm-hmm. There's hunger and thirst for truth, for theology, for recovering those missing jewels. Quoting one of your sermons. So my first question to you is, how did you become a Christian?
That happened many years ago. I was raised in a Presbyterian church that was very liberal. I never heard the gospel. I never heard about Reformed theology. I went to a secular high school, and there was a young girl that went to the same church that I did, but also went to a Christian club that met weekly. It was called Young Life. And she kept inviting me to go, and finally I went with my girlfriend, and I kind of liked it. And they were also getting to the point where they wanted to have a weekend event. It was going to be up in the mountains of Pennsylvania. So I really didn't want to go, but I went. It was on Saturday night of that weekend that they started talking about what it meant to have Christ as Lord of your life. And they used language like Him being the master of your life. And I knew in a moment that was not my life. If you would have asked me, are you a Christian? I would have said yes. But at that moment, for the first time in my life, I understood Christ was not the master of my life. If I had a problem in my life, I would pray to Him. But after the problem was gone, I basically was the God of my own life.
You were saying about the shepherds in Ezekiel.
Right. And they are initially rebuked for their failure in bringing back the lost. And what's interesting about that text is the word lost there, it's not a reference to people that are lost in the world. It's the people that are in the church, in this case the Old Testament church, who have wandered, and these shepherds didn't go out and get them.
So let me clarify the concept, because when you hear church discipline, it sounds very harsh, negative, punishment. It's very negative nuance that we don't want to hear of. Mm-hmm. It's quite the opposite. It's love and care for those that are, as you say, within the confines of the church.
That's right. God's raised up elders to look after His people. And there's two forms of discipline. One is formative, and that would be where the pastor or the elders are meeting with you and saying, we haven't seen you for a couple weeks, are you okay? Or perhaps we've heard there's a problem with your relationship with your wife, we're going to sit down and talk to you about that. That's basically what's called formative discipline. It's just a follow-up. It's not invasive to your privacy because they're the ones that are concerned about your soul. Mm-hmm. Corrective church discipline, on the other hand, is when you have someone who's fallen into serious sin, and now there's an admonition that's coming from the board of elders concerning their behavior and a plan on how to get you restored.
Right. Can we, maybe in 1 minute or so, bring up one example from the Bible when this was executed?
Well, I think in Corinthians you certainly have a case there where there was immorality that was going on, and even some people feel like the church had imposed some discipline. Paul was rebuking them for not. But by the time you get to the second letter, and there's probably a letter that's even between those two, some people think that the statements that Paul's making in the second letter is that, hey, don't go too hard on this discipline, on this particular individual. Don't be overbearing. There's a lot in there regarding shepherding the flock, not lording over them, Peter says. Paul has much to say on the topic as well. Just an oversight. The basic function of what an elder does, he looks after the people. Someone's got to do that. And when people become members of churches, and they should, what they're basically saying formally and publicly is that we're giving public acknowledgement that the leadership of the church has the right to question me about what's going on in my spiritual life.
And that's, sorry to interrupt you there, that's very linked to church membership.
Exactly. And going back to this point about the leadership getting into your life, I think it deals with this issue as well. You've got to have people in your life who love you enough to tell you what you really don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And when we're in sin, we don't want to hear from anybody. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the friends and relationships we have in the church, they tend to pull back. But it's the elders who are the shepherds. No, they got to go out and find that sheep.
And there's a big difference, as you say, in between overseeing the flock, the people in the church, and ruling over them. I think in our culture we are very used to be ruled, probably because of our history of dictatorships.
Yes.
And so maybe some pastors tend to be like a boss instead of a real shepherd. But from this perspective, the pastor is interested in the life of the believer, and when he's going to bring up certain sin or challenge or anything that is going on, it's not with the intention just to put him aside, but to bring him back to restoration.
Yeah, it's what's interesting is that at the time of the writing of this book, I think it was like shortly after that, my wife and I had an opportunity to go to Turkey to study the life of Paul and the history of the 7 churches of Revelation. So one of the places that we visited, we were right near an area which is called the Tri-City area, where you have Hierapolis, Laodicea, and Colossae. You can actually see the various mountain peaks. Like where.
By the way, you have those sermons on Revelation on your website.
I do.
You have some pictures of it. I do.
The story of the 7 churches. Well, what was interesting, Colossae hasn't been excavated. I mean, there's fantastic ruins in Turkey, but Colossae has not been excavated. All you see is a mound that's there. And so I climbed up on top of the hill, and it was at that time, and I believe this was God's hand, I looked down in the valley, and here is a sheep in distress. And a shepherd comes up to assist this sheep. And it turns out this sheep was giving birth. So this lamb is there. And this shepherd, in a very loving way, he delivers this lamb. And then you can see him bring that lamb up his face, and he blows into the face of that lamb to get it to breathe. He goes over to the water. There was a stream nearby. He cleans up the lamb. He brings. I saw all of this. But I was looking at the shepherd, and to be honest with you, he was a mess. This man there was mud all over him.
It was bloody.
He had blood and afterbirth on him. He had dung on him. And I just understood in a picture, Dawn, this is what I called you to. This is what it means to be a shepherd, to oversee. You get down in the mud.
It's a beautiful picture.
It is, and I'll never forget it. And this is what your job is.
Yeah.
And so when I come to Columbia and I have opportunity to teach men about what the ministry is, I always work this in. This is what it is. It's not anything like you're a king and you're kind of dictating to them. You get down into the mud and the dung.
Yeah, and which makes me recall that it might be a little rewarding precisely because of the investment you have to put into the ship.
There is no greater high than when you have a woman or a man who has fallen into sin and you are able to bring them back.
It's amazing.
There isn't anything
great joy.
better than that. Nothing.
Thank you for opening your heart.
Yeah.
If you want to buy the book, you can go to Amazon.com. I'm going to leave the link in the description of this video. You can buy it in English if you want, or you can buy it in Spanish as well. There.
Have a new believer, there isn't anything more practical than working through verse by verse of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
Because the Sermon on the Mount really is, in my view, the cliff notes of Jesus' entire ministry. Not everything, but just about everything is in one way or another touched in those 3 chapters of Matthew.
Yeah. Now, and you do it from an expository preaching method, but not only that, but with a covenantal approach, if I could use that word. Why is it important? Expository preaching and covenantal preaching from the Bible.
Well, expository preaching simply means that you're trying to understand the text in light of the original author and the original audience, and then working through the text actually verse by verse, phrase by phrase, sometimes word by word, and in that way conveying the original meaning and then pulling it forward to apply it to the individual today.
Yeah.
Too often somebody reads the Bible and they're immediately trying to apply what it is that they're reading before they completely understand what's there. That's what expository preaching does, and that's the real strength of it. Taking entire books of the Bible, I always encourage pastors to do this, and just work your way preaching right through the entire book. Well, as you're doing that, one of the things that becomes very apparent is that God tends to deal with man through covenants.
Okay.
And the covenantal theme is just, it's the scarlet thread running through the historicity of the Bible. And it's woven right through the fabric of that. And as you're teaching over a long period of time, years in a congregation, you can begin to weave that thread through that expository preaching from book to book to book.
So it's like, because you have taught covenant theology, doctrines of grace, many of these, and that scarlet thread connects everything. So could we say that one of the benefits of expository preaching is that you can come back to those points and connect? So and help people see that as they as they read the Bible by themselves.
Well, there's all kinds of connections. It's not just the covenant, but it does show linkage, and you begin to get the idea that there's one author of the entire book, the entire Bible. And it's true that one of the chief themes that's running through the Bible, because it's integral to everything, is the idea of covenant. God tends, when we use the word covenant, I tell people today, think in terms of the word contract. We don't typically use words like covenant, but contract is really what it is all about. But there's a difference. our contracts are usually bilateral. You know, we make an agreement. You have a car to sell. I want to buy it. We come to terms. We settle on a price. You give me the car. I give you the money. It's a bilateral covenant or a contract. God's contracts, God's covenants are unilateral. He initiates them, and he brings people into them, and they have terms that are responsible for those that are in them. And it takes time to unpack all of that. But
Pastor Dan, thank you for sharing all that. What would be your advice for them, not only in terms of getting all the theological information in their heads, but in terms of family or children?
Family is a good thing. Marriage is a good thing. And one of the concerns I have about being in a Latin context is that I feel like it is put off way too far into the distance, and it leaves for great potential for immorality and other kinds of problems. We note there at the beginning of the book of Genesis chapter 1, God blessed the man and the woman and told them that they should be fruitful and multiply. So sex is given as a gift of God to man. It's a good thing. It's a wholesome thing when it's done within the confines of marriage. And the purpose then is to have children. And this is a big part of the covenant, that men and women are called to follow him, have children, raise them in a godly way. And it goes right back to the very, very beginning. And so it grieves me at times when people put that off, having children. You know, we have to have the next thing in our life. And no matter what culture you're in, it seems like there's never enough. You know, we need the better house, we need the better car, you know, we need this, we need all these various things in our life. But I think the Word of God is indicating that you trust God for whatever those steps are in your life, and you bring your wife and you bring your family along with you as you're going through it.
So, that being said, children and a wife or a husband are not a burden for ministry. Instead, they are...
They're absolutely essential, because the man of God, if he's going to care for people, he'll have a better understanding. I mean, there are some extraordinary cases where some people are called into ministry and have a gift of singleness, but that's very, very rare. For the most part, it's going to be men that are called into it, and when you experience what it's like to deal with an intimate relationship with somebody who also has sin patterns the same as yours, and then you have children that have those same sin patterns, and interfacing with all of the tension that goes on between them and around all of those dynamics, it rounds out your ministry to minister out of your own experience in light of your study of the Word of God.
Got it. Thank you so much for that advice, and thank you for joining me. It's been
It's been my pleasure to be with you.
Very nice conversation. Thank you for opening your heart. And, well, I hope you do not retire from being retired.
Yeah.
Because you've got a lot of work.
Yeah, there is plenty of work to do.
And thank you for helping with, teaching the Word. I hope God keeps using you in our country and other countries. And, well, again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.